Hi, Leon. I'm so happy to
Hi,
meet you here today.
hi, Sonja. It's so lovely to get together for our little venture.
Yes,
Yes. Uh, Another perspective into another self.
absolutely. Yes, and I loved it. So I'm going to
Yeah,
call our series Another Perspective into Another Self. And
yes.
so far, I think it's talking to people, it's attracting people to want to talk about it.
Mm,
So let's kick off on what we are going to talk and then see where it takes us.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, where do you suggest we start with this this journey?
I am going to start with the start of that series, the very first question, which
Mm,
is it possible that our past, whether we remember it or not, is always
mm,
saved somewhere?
mm.
And I think that's such a key question because that is not something we ever think about.
Yeah, exactly. And to wrap this episode beautifully, and we will progress now through this episode, I suppose, with our comments and observations and perspectives. But as we wrap the series at the episode in the end, the whole metaphor of the flight recorder is then
Yes,
brought back again,
yes.
as if those um, things that you refer to that is saved somewhere is saved as in a flight recorder within our consciousness, as little memories, little moments, little nudges, emotional or otherwise, dreams or whatever they appear in, to remind us that something is stored there that still needs attention.
So I want to just jump in here. And when I do trauma work, so when we look at PTSD, there is always something that triggers the PTSD, and it has nothing to do with what happened to the person. It's a trigger that's completely outside, and it can trigger the PTSD. So that makes sense in this movie or in this series. What we see is that the trigger seems to be completely somewhere where to find the connection is almost impossible.
It's beautiful that you call it a trigger. It's almost like a little switch that gets switched on. And when that is switched on, there's an inner representation, an inner movie in the form of a feeling or pictures or whatever that gets switched on. It's like there's a little camera that gets switched on. Then suddenly I see on the screen of my world a certain experience that I can't understand or fathom. It's like a mystery. Where does this come from?
And I think this is exactly where people start asking question. How does this information get there? I mean, even
Mm,
when we deal with memory in our lifetime that is in our body in our lifetime, we don't have a recall of that memory. And so now to say, wow, I now have to have a recall that's even further back into my past, where do we start with that? And why do we need to do that? And all these questions are coming up. I remember when I started Family Constellations work, it was where's all this information coming from? Number one. And
mm,
number two, I was overwhelmed with what came forth in the constellations in terms of where is this information coming from? And don't we have enough to deal with in our lifetime? So why do we want to go into finding out what happened before?
which is a natural way of resisting this discomfort, or shall we say, this disruption that comes into your normal life. It's, it's like we want to resist it. There's no time for this now. And I remember in the early days when my wife first fell pregnant, it's like the question was, is there ever a perfect time for a child to come? And it's the same, suddenly this possibility or this nudge appear in your life in the form of a discomfort, and you think, please, not now. And yet it comes when it needs to come.
And that's exactly what the next sentence is. The memories all wait for the right time to be remembered one day. And even though we forget, does the past stay with us? So that's such a beautiful question. And the thing is, we are not the youngest. And there was a time in my life where people said, do not go into the past. Let sleeping dogs lie. Why do you want to worry about the past? You've got to stay in the present and focus on the future. The past will only pull you back. So it was seen as a negative to actually dwell, if I may say so, in the past.
Yeah.
So it was looked at as, you don't want to go to the past because it's painful, so you want to not go there. First of all, there's a lot of negative memories, and when you have negative memories coming up in the day, your day is not good, so you spoil your day by going into the past. So I remember there was a phase in my life where it was absolutely do not do that. And now we have this beautiful series which says, wow, what if you do? What could be different in your future? So it is completely different thinking to where I was at one stage in my life.
I think that's exactly right. I remember the 80s and the 90s as a period of positive thinking, where positive thinking got embedded into psychology. The power of positive thinking. There was even programs from America that flooded South Africa, and people curiously dove into these programs, all of which just to focus more attention on the seemingly only positive that counts in your life, and the negative to be avoided. And I think this series suggested the other way. It opens a window, in a sense, to say, if you dare be courageous enough to go in and look there, you might find, shall we say, a gem. So you might find some gold there that can enrich your life and open your life in a completely new perspective trajectory. I think that currently on air, there's also a new rising concern by people like Professor Ian McGilchrist, who says, modern society has become so entangled in the left brain operation, the logical thinking, and that it wants to contain the progress of society and even environmentalism and so on through some logical rationality. And he says it's only the right brain that opens up us to a much broader perspective, to tap into a source of inspiration and creativity. And I think it's quite time, yes, that this series now lands in our lap and to be discussed, because it suggests that there is a right brain way, an intuitive way that connects us to a wider source of information, that if we have access to that, it could really enrich our lives meaningfully. So that's would now be my broad stroke approach to look at it.
Yeah. So I've sort of thrown in the questions before actually going into anything further, because the story is actually about three women that are of similar age who have completely different walks in life, yet they are best friends. And what I really struck with on this is that no matter what happened, their friendship stayed intact and they were questioning each other. And I loved the fact that there was this questioning and non-belief, and this is all weird, and so on. So I loved that interaction with those three girls. But in this first episode, the story actually begins with safety, and the story begins with the part that is later comes to play in what we call the constellation. It's not called the constellation in the series. So I like to call it Family Constellation because that's what you and we are facilitators for Family Constellation. And it doesn't matter what it is called, we can clearly see that this is a Family Constellation movement when he actually does the movement eventually, when we actually get to see the movement. So, anything you want to add?
Yeah. Yes, I think Family Constellations is where it all started in the modern age. Prior to that, it was probably called something else, Family of Origin. In this series, we will get to what it's called, but I think in broad strokes we can call it systemic work. It's the interconnectivity of all parts at all time, and that's the curiosity, and that for me makes our work very exciting. That the interconnectivity of things. That if you know the old saying a couple of years ago, if the butterfly flaps its wings in the east, it could create a storm in the Pacific. So really that we get to this ecological intelligence to understand how things are interconnected. And then as far as the series is concerned, Sergi then discovers she has a certain condition. And the others forms a beautiful support structure around her. And as you say, they remain loyal. No matter how their egoic beliefs and belief systems differ with each other, they bound themselves around a certain loyalty that is really beautiful how it develops throughout the series. But it's not as if they can remain on the outside of the evolving events, because they get sucked into this mystery of resolving problems in a different way. And each one of them developed a story as well.
The word interconnectivity, I think that is something we are not always aware of, how everything is connected. And I'll go back to when I did my trauma. One of my trauma thesis was actually doing the sins of the fathers. How does it actually go forward? And I called it, for me, it was about the trauma. And I had an understanding that if one member in the family has trauma, everybody else has secondary and subsequent trauma as well. So everybody is connected to that, although people don't really see it that way. Everybody is so focused on, this is my pain within that, but it's not how are we connected to each other. And I think that is something we in the way we live is, I need to be myself, I need to focus on myself, I need to do this by myself. And what you called the word egoic, it is a survival structure that we are in. But how can we survive when we just are an island by ourselves? And we couldn't, even if we tried to be an island by ourselves, we are connected. And actually to understand how we are connected into our family system is, for some people, very new, especially when you have so many family systems falling apart and you have so many people saying, I don't want to be part of my family system for one reason or another.
Exactly. And so the series starts in a beautiful way, very dramatic, very painful, opening scenes with Segi playing on the merry-go-round, approaching her father. And there's the opening scene that gives away what will follow in the form of a pomegranate. Father offers her the pomegranate beautiful metaphor of what you just spoke, that in that little one seed, there's an interconnectivity to all the seeds in the pomegranate, and a rich symbolism of life that is held within that symbol.
Yes, he actually gave the symbol Dr. Mr. Zaman actually gave is that the pomegranate is a symbol for fortune as well as life after death.
Yes, very interesting. And as far as my memory is concerned, in Kabbalah, it's also used, pomegranate specifically, it's also used for all the teachings in Kabbalah. So apparently there are, let's say, 500 or 700 different teachings, which represents the little grains of the pomegranate. But it's never isolated, because all the teachings, all the learning form one whole, which is also an adjacent richness to understand.
Yeah, so I think the symbol of the pomegranate is within one life, there are other lives as well. And that's, we're talking about the interconnectivity. We couldn't be an island by ourselves, because whatever happens in me happens around me, whether I am living by myself or whether I'm living within a family structure. There is no way we can go through this life without connecting with other people.
So Sergei gets bad news, and she makes an impromptu decision. She storms out of the hospital, to Ada's dismay, because suddenly when Ada comes back into the room, Sergei is missing. Meantime, she set it up to go on a journey, to just escape all of this, and to actually seek alternative treatment. So I think that's also familiar, because in our family systems, wherever cancer or these severe traumatic, symptomatic illnesses appeared, we would witness the desperation of the individual family members that wants to find something else. There's something else here, and it's already a start for diving into a deeper inquiry. It cannot only be solved on a symptomatic level. So the beginning is she wants to seek alternative, and therefore the journey to Alvialek. Do I pronounce it right? Alvialek.
I wouldn't know how to pronounce it differently. But the thing is, she is prompted when she meets another cancer patient that she'd been met before, and he gives her the name of this alternate person because she sees how well he looks. And that is what she wants. She doesn't want to feel ill anymore. She wants the wellness that this little boy was experiencing. And so she gets this link to go and meet this Mr. Zaman. And their first meeting, I think, is very key. You can see she's very nervous, and he's like very cool and whatever. And she's
just before we get there, there's this little turn that they make to the Parthenon, I think, or
yes.
the Athena, and there's this playful light, because Layla keeps things playful and sprightly and exuberant, and she wants to have a collective wish that they pledge to the gods, let's say. But it also speaks to that desperation in that we want to call in all help we can when we're in these situations as humans. You know, we're happy to look at alternative help beyond our own intelligence. And for me, that's the key. Is there a place we can access, we can touch to a higher intelligence that knows better than we do?
And this is really what they did. They put their plea to what we would call a higher intelligence, and had an intent of a manifestation possibly happening. And yes, you're bringing it back, that Sefki's intent wish is that she's going to meet someone that she's going to, a man that she can fall in love with and have a beautiful relationship. So that's part of what they each had a certain intent. And you're right, that intent is really key, because right at the end, we actually see how each of those intents manifested in a very interesting way, but also that when we set an intent that we want to manifest, that there is a journey attached to it. And I think sometimes when we set an intent and we want a manifestation, we're not prepared for the journey. And I like that you brought it up, because that's part of the journey in the journey.
A journey within a journey. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So at this point, it's surprising then to her that someone immediately speaks to the pomegranate, as when he says, there are many lives, there are many lives in one life, and then he also speaks to the abundance of this symbol, which says to her, but it's possible. It is possible to have an abundant life, to have the love of your life, to have a rich experience in life. Every one of us, we can have that.
Yeah. So they call it the expansion of origin family.
Mm-hmm.
But he's very clear, and I want to stress that she wanted a miracle cure, because she saw this little boy had a miracle cure, and she actually wanted a miracle cure. So I would argue that if you believe strong enough in anything, you will have your miracle cure. That is one way of doing it. But Zaman is very clear, and he says, this is a different way. Let's look at what is possible. But he also cautions, and he says, this is not a guarantee. And when I facilitate, that is the one caution I always put forward. Because people come and they've heard about this wonderful work, and then they want that miracle. And that is not what this is about.
I want to fully concur with that. I think that the one danger in the facilitation world is to create dependencies with your clients. So the clients start believing that you have a miracle way of helping them to achieve their objectives. So in other words, it's objectifying their own power by putting it and projecting it onto the facilitator. This is a very important aspect of our work, that it's not about that. But at the same time, it's also not about saying that only medical science is the answer. I think what Saman is starting to focus on here is to show maybe you need to look at all aspects of how you hold this symptom in place. So yes, let's look at the medical solution. But let's look at the emotional components of that. Let's look at all the aspects, but let's not exclude a spiritual perspective that you might not be aware of, that is held somewhere else in the past of your family line. That's where this work is valuable.
And this is it. When they were at the Parthenon, they were basically asking what we call the higher self, the beyond. I call it the beyond, the God, whatever you want to call it. So they already had an understanding that there is a power that is bigger than just the human power. And Zaman says we deal with the spiritual of the origin of diseases. Now, this is a foreign concept to many people. What does my disease have to do with a spiritual origin. And what is that spiritual origin?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a big background of spiritual experiences and also religious experiences. And in some religions, when there is a deviation, an abnormal child, or somebody becomes ill, there is a belief that God doesn't look kindly on you and that you are thus cursed. And this is not what it is. It is, I always had a difficulty. God, who loves us, will not curse us. So, and I have this belief that for me, the spiritual is unconditional love. So, how can an illness be born from unconditional love? And so, this is where this gets a lovely little twist, because the origin of the disease is in the human,
Mm-hmm.
is in the family of origin. So it has nothing to do with the unconditional love per se, the origin of the disease. So that is something that I'm just becoming aware of as I'm actually speaking to you.
Yes, beautiful, and it coincides and aligns beautifully with the work of Jung that speak to the unconscious, the collective unconscious. Now, I think you and I are discovering more and more that a family system has a collective unconscious.
Yes.
And so this methodology, whether we call it source of origin or family of origin or family constellations or expansion, doesn't matter. It's an invitation to do inquiry into that collective unconscious. It's a methodology that reveals potentially what could be the cause of the symptom.
Exactly. But the thing is, we need to first be open to it and have an understanding, the possibility, and it's only the possibility that my disease, that my illness is not just medical, that it is as a result of mental, emotional deviation in the family of origin. And that's what I discovered when I did my little trauma thesis, when I was doing my traumatology. And that's one of the reasons that Family Constellation spoke to me, is because it just coincides so well with what happened in the family before is what we live for. And that's a different loyalty. The friends, the three girls are loyal to each other and with each other. But my disease, and I have a question, could then be as a loyalty to the family system?
Mm-hmm. Out of loyalty to a family member or the family system, could it be that I say, I'm not enough to hold happiness on my own? I must share the unhappiness or the disease of my family system. I don't deserve to stand alone in happiness.
Yeah, so there is so much to explore. And I don't think, with all our years of doing facilitation, and both you and me, we've done over 20 years of facilitation. So, and there's so much more to explore, and that excites me even more. But
yeah,
I have a question. And it's a question I think the public would ask. Someone touches Sergei's hand, and then he gets an impulse. What's your take on it? Because I, as a facilitator, don't do that.
I'm very hesitant. In my approach, I respect more of the psychological boundary framework, where if you touch, it is with permission first. It's
Yes.
not a reach out and say, give my hand. It's
Yes.
not directive in that sense. It is non-directive. It's asking a question, always asking a question to test the boundaries. And so if it's appropriate and the impulse is there and you ask and there is permission, then probably in that context it would be. But I think preferably is to hold the more of a healthy psychological framework where the touching is not appropriate. Now in groups we know some other work gets done and people sometimes hug each other in the field and so on. So touching there is a bit blurry. But in this context, I think I agree with you. I think I would think twice before I just reach out and say, give me your hand.
That's the one aspect. And the other aspect is that I have a sense that at that moment, she could have handed over power to him. And that is not a way that I work. Is for me, I am no different to anybody else in the field. I have no superpowers. I have no, shall I say, psychic powers. And I like to work more technically than anything else. I don't know how you look at it.
Yes. I think to stay on the technical side, so my main source of approach is self-inquiry. So first I do self-inquiry on myself, then I use the same methodology in the client relationship. And it's about discovery. Can we together move from the unknown to the revelationary area where we together discover certain things that could be of value for the client.
Mm.
There's a movement there, but we start ignorant, so to speak.
I like working ignorantly, and
Yeah.
I like to discover, when I work, I like to discover at the same time that the client discovers.
Yes.
Or that the field actually gives the information.
Yes.
Because the information comes out in the field. And for me, it is, we do this together. So that's just the one thing that I would do differently. However, I love his question. Do you think that you can thank cancer?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very provocative question, especially when you are deeply entrenched in the pain, the symptoms, and the misery of the experience. Can I really shift my consciousness to such a perspective that I have a new relationship with the symptom, so that it wakes something up in me to become grateful? Could it be that it held a gift for me that I had a blind spot to?
So in coaching, I also ask that question. But it's much more difficult in coaching than to work to that in that process. And so what I love about when he says, maybe this disease wants you to remember something. And so that's how he introduces her to be in agreement to go into the field.
Yeah.
And setting up that the disease is the memory trigger point.
Yeah. Yes, and her response to that is quite appropriate. No, hell no. and then she rambles on about that. But more than remembering, because maybe remembering is just phrasing it a little bit more complicated than it is. Because one could argue, the client can argue, how the hell can I remember? I'm in the third generation of this, which is not what is happening. But it could also be that could it enrich your insight into what is causal to your experience? It could be various types of words, but yes, remember on behalf of the family system, that's correct. Being a catalyst for that which was forgotten, by the family system that was neglected, that was excluded, but wanted to be included? Yes, that remember is correct. I would agree. But her reaction is interesting to me. That's she throws her toys out of the pram.
It's such a normal human reaction. I mean, I would have reacted exactly the same way. I mean,
Yeah.
really, if you tell me I should be grateful for this, and I'm angry that that I have this illness, you're asking too much of me. You're really pushing me over the edge when you do that. And she does feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. Get the hell out. Get the hell away from me.
Yeah. But then we do not actually see the process, and the movie goes 1 month further. But or when the friends come again, she refuses to give them what has happened. And I remember that when I started training, it was very important not to share what you experienced with the other people that were in the group. And I always caution, because like we see that information comes out and then everybody wants to run home, or lots of people want to run home, and they want to verify, is this true? And with that, everything falls flat. The magic falls flat. But it's not about the magic. It's about the process that she has to go through in herself in that month, the struggle. And I often have people that say, Sonja, I was really not in a good place after we had a constellation. And I think we need to maybe put more emphasis on that there is going to be a process that you need to follow, that you need to allow the process to complete. Let's be honest. This process has just been a massive, massive operation. It's equal to having a massive operation. And what happens after a massive operation? We don't feel good. We have to go to bed. We have a time of convalescence. And yet we don't give this work the same degree of respect. And this is what's come up for me. This is something I definitely want to go forward with. Much more respect.
Yes. That reverence that we have for a body that just come out of the operation table. We quick, we speak quietly, we pussyfoot around the bed, and we give the patient space to recover. Now, similarly, on this level of operation, we need to be reverent to what has just happened. And I think in my experience in the last couple of the decade or so, I think I detect in us humans an attachment, a fascination with story. So we want to embroider on story. We want to know more about story. So we amplify, in a sense, we sometimes amplify the wrong story. And I agree with you. One of my teachers were very, very tough. That actually, if you want to discuss this, then the client who just experienced the shift must actually go outside and sit under a tree, so that it's not part of this conversation. Because sometimes, like in trauma, this conversation, these stories, can activate the trauma afresh. And I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So that's definitely something I want to bring into my practice more and more, is to not speak about it, and also not to refer to family members to try and find out if the story is true. I like to tell my clients that it is not about the story. Yes, this series is about the story, but the work itself is not about the story. It is about the inner meaning that is happening to you when you are in this process. And that meaning changes as you go from one day to the next. And it's an ongoing process. It is not just a process and then it's all done. It's an ongoing process. And we need to actually leave the time for that process to just settle. I would like to call it to just settle. But he does something else. He always gives homework, what I call homework. He always gives a task for the client to complete before they can do another constellation. I don't know if you picked that up.
What exactly are you referring to?
So he, with safety, we don't quite see the task, but the pomegranate becomes very, very prominent for her. So he would have probably given her a task in relation to the pomegranate.
Oh, yes. He hands her a shell, doesn't he?
Yes.
In the end of a constellation. I see in the picture, he gives her something, she takes it.
Yes.
That's probably what you're referring to.
Yes.
Also, not to discuss it within the instruction, not to discuss it with anybody else. There also lies a bit of homework, which speaks to integration.
Yes. Yeah. So continuing with safety, then a month later, we actually see the constellation work itself, and where she shares her story.
Yes. She starts to share her story, and the girlfriends, the friends, starts noticing there's a definite shift here. She's lighter, she looks better. They arrive at the house. She flips the hair. She's got a new hairdo. She's got a new lease of life, a new inspiration, and there's a twinkle in her eye.
Yes. And so we then see the constellation, and we see the rage that's actually in her. And the burden that she's carrying. But what is really key is when she says in the constellation, so now we're in the constellation where she said she's taken up this burden to spare her mother the pain of losing her husband. I had started to take his place. And that is very, very significant. So as a facilitator, we know that when a child takes on a parent's standing up as a parent next to, in this case, she stood up as the father next to the mother, she takes on all the burdens of that father. But it's also, and I'm going to give a little bit of a clue here, and I'm going to spoil it a little bit, but it's also the reason why the mother will not allow her to ever have a man. So her biggest wish to be with a man is actually key in this sentence where she says, I took on this burden to spare my mother the pain of losing her husband. I had started to take his place.
Yeah.
And that's where the dots connect. The mother will not allow her to have a man of her own, because then the mother will lose her husband that the daughter has fulfilled, the space that the daughter has fulfilled.
Yeah.
And so sometimes these unconscious vows, she was only 5 years old when she made that vow, but it was such a strong vow that she lived by it, and that she actually chose to become an attorney because of it. So
to protect the mother. Yeah.
So this is something that in no other work have I seen the power of the vow. So sometimes, what are the vows we take when we are little children?
Yeah.
This is we're opening a whole new can of worms here.
And I'm glad you're calling it a vow, because we humans, we love this vow word.
Yes.
We vow at marriages, we vow only to break our vows. But in this case, it's an unconscious phenomena. And it's only later in life that this discovery is actually possible. It's so deeply embedded into that innocent unconscious of the child. And what you're speaking to fascinates me again and again, because not only is it embedded in the unconscious of the child, but embedded in the unconscious of the parent. So the parent
Yes.
opens up to this possibility. Oh, here's a replacement for my loss. And so they welcome that surrogacy,
Yes.
or that step in position, but without knowing that this is all unfolding to a very painful experience for them both, because then the natural severance that needs to happen between mother and child later at 20 and 25 is very difficult. And the entanglement is very difficult to dislodge.
And we see that when a child stops being a child.
Mm.
And so I love the healing sentences. We call them healing sentences. I'm just her daughter. I'm just your daughter.
Mm.
So this is like, who am I now? I've been the husband, now I'm just the daughter. And I see it in facilitation that for clients, this is a massive adjustment. How do I go from the one to the other? And then he gives the next sentence, I'm dropping the burden I've been carrying for you all these years. The release, to hand the burden back to where it belongs, or just drop it. It's not my burden to carry. I'm a 5-year-old little girl. I'm just a little girl. I'm just a child, and you are my mother. To get the relationship aspect going, the mother is the responsible one, and the child is just a child.
Mm.
And I love these healing sentences. And then it's too much for me. She says, wow, I've done this all my life.
Mm.
And this is too much for me. So these sentences are spoken in the constellation. And it's the first time the client observing the constellation actually hears it. So how does it filter through to the client? And that's why the time is given, because this is new information. This is new information for the client at this point. For her to find, I'm the little girl, mom is the mom. And that's new information. It's changing and dropping everything in your life. Can you imagine? Everything that you've built up in your life, all of a sudden you're just a little girl. This is a massive amount to try and come to terms with.
Yeah. So the map that you constructed based on that loyalty to the parent, that map needs a redesign.
Yes.
And that's why the space is so important. Towards the end of the constellation, he asked the representative to take one step forward to see if the client is able and ready to step into the new reality. And then the feedback is something is missing, which indicates let's wait. Let's allow the integration to happen properly.
That's the one thing. And the other thing that's happening is where he knows there is more information. The man sees that there is more information, and he is not prepared to go there at this point. And I love this as a facilitator. we need to know when we've done enough.
Mm-hmm.
Would the client want to know more? Absolutely yes. Is it safe for the client to know more? No, because there is a secret. And do you want to know what my take on a secret is?
Please, I'd love to hear.
Only the holder of the secret has the right to reveal the secret.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he's not going to overstep that mark. Because the secret is revealed right at the end of the series. And the holder of the secret revealed the secret. And he never sets up a constellation to reveal that secret. I don't know if you've noticed it.
Yes. And it reminds me that we're busy with a dramatic rendition here of the work we do. So a cliffhanger is very appropriate at this point in time.
Yeah. But then where she now connects back to the father, where he says to her in the constellation, the best thing you can do for me is to live your life fully, freely, and enjoy it. And that is for her, she no longer needs to be entangled in his death, because it doesn't serve the dead for us to be entangled in it. Open yourself up to love, and I will always be with you. So he's giving her the go ahead. You go and find your love. I'm can't do anything about me. Go and find your love and live your life to the absolutely fullest. So for her, that is key. I'm now only the daughter, and I'm allowed to love. And I think that is a beautiful way that came to a conclusion on that.
Yes. So that's the father's response. And obviously it cements that first impulse that she feels when she says, I am only your daughter. I notice on so many faces in our constellation years, the sense of relief and lightness when a client can say, I'll only want to be your child. That, and the next thing is the skin lights up, the eyes show relief. So much happens in the neural net of the client. But still, the power of the father's potential response to say, only thing I want for you is to live your life fully. That will actually honor me, not you holding on to my pain.
Yes. So that's Savke's story, and I think that constellation was beautiful, and it came to a beautiful, I say, conclusion.
Yeah.
And then we move on, because now Ada is the one who questions everything. She's the doctor. She is, everything has to have a structure. Everything has to have a medical component. And for her, this makes absolutely no sense. Yes, she can see her friend is happy and light, but she just is very, very resistant until she meets the man.
So we get little inklings, little giveaways during the episode of how the others are getting touched by certain things.
Yes.
They're either annoyed, they resist certain statements, but you see certain things are activated. And it's beautiful in two ways. In one way, I'm looking through the lens of the telenovela or the dramatic sequencing. In telenovelas, you have this beautiful story arc thing. And then at a certain time, a new story arc starts. Now, Layla's story arc already started when her life starts to fall apart.
Yes.
She hears that she can't pay the school fees. She now has to ask her mother and all sorts of things. And then with that, also how Ada responds to certain situations, and where the three of them then actually demands of Ada to also attend with them one of the sessions. and how the buttons then get pushed in the process.
Yes. So there's a whole lot of push and pull, and life continues. So this is the thing: is everybody's life continues, and everybody is stuck in their own life situations. So, and there is quite an irritation with Savki, who is so exuberant about her experiences, and all she wants to do is help her friends and want her friends to also do the work. And the total, no, we're not up to it. Although Layla is, I think she's just the fun part. She's up to anything. She'll do anything just for the fun of it. It's for her, it's just the fun of it. There is no real other connection there. But Ada is very stuck in where she is, and has her own problems in her own relationship and her own where she wants to be in life and that type of thing. So, and then she meets someone, and someone picks up the tremor in her hand. So that is key for a facilitator having an observant eye. And
the body phenomena.
Yes. Yeah. And often when I do a constellation, people say, how do you know that? And I will say, you guys were talking there, and I've heard this, and I saw that. So the information is always around. As facilitators, we need to learn to have an observant eye.
So here's a good question, an interesting question for you, is what is your technique? What's your style in keeping yourself focused on certain information, but also keeping your peripheral vision open enough so that you can pick up these other.
I like to start with a wide peripheral vision so that I take in as much as I can, and then it gets narrowed down to when we start the constellation, where we're actually going to start. Because
you need both. You need both perspectives simultaneously.
So I want to, when I have a workshop or facilitation, I listen to all the information that's surrounding, because it gives me an idea of where a client is. Sometimes a client comes and says, I've done XYZ constellations. I now want to do a constellation on my grandmother, or on this, or on that. And I hear that. But I don't make a promise that that is where the constellation will go. Because I like to start from a neutral perspective. I have all the outside information, as much as I possibly can. And then the field directs, where are we going to go? So setting up, I will follow the client up to a point, and then I start then very small and allow the field to expand.
From small to larger, to including more components that could reveal the inquiry process, support the inquiry process.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I'm curious about, and I'm asking the question because I know you can answer it, is there's the vision into the, let's call it the spatial arrangement, the field as we call it. There's that connection there. So there you have your peripheral vision wide open. You notice all the impulses and so on, and the movements. But at the same time, you're staying focused on the client.
Yes.
You're staying focused on her responses and reactions to certain unfolding events. And that is not enough yet, I think, I presume, excuse me, for making conclusive assumptions. We still need to test whether how that lands for the client.
Absolutely.
We have all this information, but we still need shall we say, an empirical process to test whether that's true for the client.
Absolutely.
And how would you do that? Well, what is your approach?
So sometimes I have a thought, we can call it an hypothesis, and I will say, I just want to test something. I just introduce it as I want to test something. And then I bring that into the field and see how the field reacts. Sometimes the client does not react, but the field reacts. And then the client has I didn't want that to come in. I didn't want that to play a part because I wanted some other direction. And so I'm very cautious as to giving a client art-based, a client's goal, because I am not allowed to manipulate the field for the perfect outcome for the client. And I'm very cautious of that. And so it could be that the client is very resistant to what comes in, but the field reacts. And then obviously, as the field then finds the resolution, sometimes the client is still stuck and struggles to find the resolution within themselves. But having seen the resolution helps the client in the time thereafter to actually embrace that which was resisted up front. Because a client goes in with a certain outcome, with a very certain structure, and then this work is not about structure. This work doesn't form a structure. It goes its own way. It's fluid.
I love that. And I think if I hear you correctly between the lines also, is that sometimes clients can be stuck. The stuckness actually comes from a stuckness to their own story.
Yes.
And more than many times, we all get surprised by the way the real wisdom and the real direction is revealed, because it's more than often not what we expected.
And that's where it really gets very interesting, because life is not what we expected, and we can't control the future by trying to control the past. The past has already happened, and we need to look at all parts of the past, not just the parts that we want to look at. Because that which we avoid. So here is one of our main theories is exclusion creates suffering. So why is the client suffering? Because they want to exclude certain parts. And then when the field brings it in, because that's really what the field wants the inclusion. So it's getting from the headspace into allowing it into the heart space.
For example, Ada says, no, I don't want anything to do with this. Whatever you guys experience and talk about, any therapist can also do, and there's doctors to help you with this stuff. And she says to Zaman in so many words, no way will she attend this weird situation, this weird work at this weird place. And then we see that someone says, okay, it's your decision, and he walks out. And then she walks in sheepishly, and she does attend. But what's interesting there, her surprise is there sits Toprak again, the ex-boyfriend, which she did not expect to be in the same healing circle as her. So as if the knowing field, the higher intelligence field, knows what needs to be included for healing.
Absolutely.
And it brings that, yeah.
And going back to what I said just now, when a client does not want to look at that which needs to be included, the truth is, unless we get to the root of it, it will only get worse. And that's something we have to remember as facilitators, is to bring in sometimes that which the client wants to exclude, but we know that inclusion is absolutely paramount. We work in the field of wholeness. I call it the field of wholeness.
So is there something else you want to include for this first episode?
I think we've sort of gone through the first episode. Yes, it's very interesting. There's a lot of side stories.
Yes.
But I really wanted to take out the parts that are really relevant for my observation as a facilitator.
I think you've already touched on it, but this beautiful sentence that unless you get to the root of it, it will only get worse. And I think you just said it, actually. I just want to repeat it because for me, then the last bit is really beautiful, where I think it's in the text, where it says on the voiceover, right? Where it says the past, whether we remember it or not, is always saved somewhere. And then that bit that I like so much about the flight recorder. The flight recorder metaphor, it preserves the data from the past, the tastes, the smells, and it waits for the right time to be remembered. It's almost like it's very patiently waiting there, but somewhere stored in your informational data structure, and then it reveals itself at the right moment. And then it becomes like unavoidable. Now is the time. It needs to be worked at. And I think as clients, potential clients and coaches and people in this field listen to this conversation, they might also think, oh, maybe this is time that I also expand my perspective as a coach to include this alternative way of of service to a client.
Absolutely. And you are a coach, I'm a coach. And so for me to bring this into the world of the coaches is, I think, such a beautiful way for them to add to their coaching, whatever coaching they do. But we will talk more about that, I think, in our future episodes.
Yes, of course.
But I think we've spoken a lot. I didn't realize where we would go. I mean, this has been amazing for me. I don't know what the experience has been for you, Leon.
It's very rich. I had a sense of a natural flow of coming together of two perspectives flowing into one. And I think there's this presence in this intention of ours that brings our thought processes together for a purpose that we will still learn how it will be applied. So I'm curious about how this will unfold.
I'm also curious because this is our very first attempt. Thank you for being with me, and thank you for volunteering to do this. And I think the two of us together, we bring out the questions and the answers. And thank you, Leon. I really appreciate it.